Welcome to Pharmacology classes by MSR. In this video, I am going to explain about various joints and the movements associated with the joints. Joint is also called as articulation. So, joint is nothing but a point where two bones or a bone and cartilage or a bone and teeth are meeting. A point where this two bones or a bone and cartilage or bone and teeth are meeting. So the scientific study of these joints is called as arthrology. So these joints are classified depending upon their structure and function. So depending upon whether the space is present between the bones, joining bones or not, they are classified, or the type of connective tissue that is binding the bones together. So depending upon the space between the bones or depending upon the connective tissue between the bones, they are classified into various types. Depending upon the structure of the joints, they are classified into three different types: fibrous joints, cartilaginous and synovial joints. So the first one is fibrous joints. So as the name indicates, the two bones are held together by the irregular connective tissue which is very rich in the fibers. So we call it as fibrous joints. The fibrous connective tissue is holding the bones together, joining the bones together. So we call it as fibrous joint. And the second one is cartilaginous joint. As the name indicates, the bones are held together by the cartilage. So we term it as cartilaginous joints. So in both this fibrous joint and cartilaginous joint, we don't have the synovial cavity. Moving on to the third one, the synovial joints. They have the synovial cavity where the bones are held together by the irregular connective tissue and also by the required ligaments. So depending upon the function of the joints, they are again subclassified, that is called as functional classification of the joints. So what is the major function of the joints? They help for the movement. So depending upon the movement, they are classified into three types: synanthrosis, amphiarthrosis and diarthrosis. Synanthrosis is nothing but holding together. The bones are held very tightly together so that they don't have any movement. So they are immovable joints. And the plural form of this synanthrosis is synanthrosis. And the second type is amphiarthrosis. Amphia indicates amphibian means which can live on water and land. So here amphi means both. Amphiarthrosis are the joints which can move in both directions. So a very slight movement is available for this amphiarthrosis joints, and the plural form is amphiarthrosis. And the third form is diarthrosis, which is a movable joint, freely movable joint, and all the forms of diarthrosis comes under synovial joints. So let's start with the first type of structural joints. The first one is fibrous joint. So the fibrous joints, the examples are classified into three types: sutures, dentoalveolar and interosseous membranes. All these three comes under the fibrous joints. Fibrous joints, as we have seen, there are three types: sutures, dentoalveolar and interosseous membranes. The first one is sutures. So where these sutures are present? They are present only between the bones of the skull, and they are made up of thin layer of irregular connective tissue. So between our cranial bones, the skull bones, we have this sutures which make the immovable joints. Immovable indicates cyanthrosis. All the sutures come under cyanthrosis. No movement, immovable joints. So they have irregular interlocking edges so that they will increase the binding of the joints and they prevent the chances of fractures. So frontal bone, it is bind together by a suture line which usually gets completely fused by the age of 6. So after the age of 6 also, if the suture persists, we call it as metopic suture. Okay, metopic suture. And all the sutures are cyanthrosis, immovable joints. They can't move. The second type of fibrous joint is called as interosseous membrane. So here a substantial sheet of dense irregular connective tissue is there which will help to bind the long bones. So because of this interosseous membrane, they will have slight movement which comes under the structural classification of amphiarthrosis, which have slight movement. And interosseous membrane joints, usually we can find the examples in the radius and ulnar bones or tibia and fibula bones. We can see this type of interosseous membrane fibrous joint. The interosseous membrane, as we have seen in the previous slide, it is present between the tibia and fibula or radius and ulna. So syndimosis is nothing but the fibrous joint, nothing but the band or ligament of the fibrous tissue is helping for attachment of the long bones. So this is nothing but syndimosis, and this helps for a slight movement which is called as amphiarthrosis. So then another example for syndimosis or interosseous membrane is gomphosis. So gomphosis is nothing but a bolt or a nail which is fixed. So here our teeth is like a bolt or a nail which is fixed into a socket. So the only example for this gomphosis is our teeth and their sockets. So the irregular connective tissue between a tooth and its socket is nothing but the periodontal ligament, or the membrane, interosseous membrane between the teeth and the socket is nothing but periodontal ligament. So this type is coming under the cyanthrosis, which doesn't have any movement. Cyanthrosis indicates no movement. So though it is coming under this fibrous tissue or fibrous joint, it doesn't have any movement, and any inflammation or degeneration of the gums may produce the periodontal diseases. The second type of joints are cartilaginous joints. As we have discussed, the bones are held together by the cartilage, so we call it as cartilaginous joints. So cartilaginous joints, as the name indicates, the bones are held together by the cartilage, and the movement may be immovable or slightly movable, so they may be cyanthrosis or amphianthrosis. So there are two types of cartilaginous joints which comes under synchrondosis and symphysis. So let's start with synchrondosis. Nothing but here the bones are held together by the connecting material called as hyaline cartilage. The best example is the epiphyseal plate, which is also called as growth plate, which will connect the epiphysis and diaphysis of the growing bone. So what happens is, when the bone elongation ceases, the bone will replace this hyaline cartilage. So the bone growth is ceased, immovable will happen. So that comes under synchrondosis. The second type of the cartilaginous joint is symphysis. Symphysis is nothing but here the bones are joined together by the fibrocartilage, and they provide partial movement, amphiarthrosis. And usually the symphysis is occurring only in the midline of our body. So if you take the midline of the body, you can see the sternum in the first, then your vertebral column, then the pubis. So all this midline portion of our bones, they are held together by the symphysis, by the fibrocartilage. The third type of joints are synovial joints. Synovial joints. As the name indicates, there is some cavity or a space between the two joining bones, and this cavity is called as synovial cavity. So because of the presence of a cavity or space between the bones, they have the free movement, which comes under the functional classification of diarthrosis. And the bones of this synovial joint are covered by a hyaline cartilage, which is called as articular cartilage, joining cartilage. And this synovial joints are of 6 different types, which are ball and socket, planar or gliding joint, condyloid joint, saddle, hinge and pivot joint. So the synovial joint has two layers. The first layer is the fibrous layer, outer fibrous layer, and the innermost is the synovial membrane. So the fibrous membrane will give the flexibility and strength to the synovial joint. Whereas the synovial membrane, it gives a space, or the synovial cavity, which gives a space for the easy movement of the bones. And they have an articulating cartilage. Articulation means joining. So when the bones are joining, at that surface, the outer surface, we have the cartilage, articulating cartilage. So this will help to smooth and slippery surface of that particular bone and to reduce the friction between the bones, and it also helps to absorb the shock. And in the synovial cavity, we have a fluid which is called as synovial fluid, which is secreted by the synovial membrane. This synovial membrane, it will reduce the friction by lubricating the joints, it will absorb the shock, it will supply the oxygen and nutrients and remove the carbon dioxide to the joint. And it also contains the phagocytes in this particular liquid, so which will help to remove the microbes and the debris. So there are 6 different types of the synovial joints. The first one is the ball and socket. So here one bone is being articulating or joining with the other bone. So one bone will have a shape of a ball and the other will have a shape of a socket, so that the ball fits into the socket. The femur bone, which is acting as a ball surface, will fix into the socket of the acetabulum of the pelvis. In the same way, the humerus acts as a ball structure which fixes into the glenoid fossa of the shoulder blade or the shoulder bone. So this is a ball and socket joint. The next type is planar joint. As the name indicates, plane. So the two planes, whether they are flat or slightly curved, the flat surfaces or curved surfaces are joined together by the planar joints. Usually these planar joints can be seen in the carpals of the hand or tarsals of the foot or in the vertebrae. So the motion is limited. We can't have the rotation of this particular joints. The third type are condyloid joints. These condyloid joints are found in the shallow depression of one bone, which is receiving into a round bony area of the other bone. So you can see in the diagram over here, one is having a round surface which is fit into the shallow depression of the other bone. So usually this type of joints can be seen in the base of the fingers, in the metacarpophalangeal joints, or in the radiocarpal joints in the wrist. The next type of synovial joint is saddle joint. So here two bones are joining, are articulating with each other because they are having concave and convex shape. If one bone is having a concave shape, the other will have a convex shape. So they can fix easily. So this type of saddle joints can be seen in the thumb, thorax, middle ear and the heel region. Hinge joint. In this type of joint, the articulating surfaces or the joining surfaces are molded into each other in such a manner that they have movement in a single direction. This type of joints can be seen in the shoulders, hip, elbow and knee. So pivot joint, here one bone will have a ring-like structure and the other bone which is having a rounded end, that rounded end will fix into this particular ring structure. This can be seen in the wrist, so we will have the complete movement of our wrist, circular movement. So these are 6 types of synovial joints: ball and socket, saddle, condyloid, planar joints, hinge joints and pivot joints. So where they are present, how they are functioning, all this we have seen in the previous slides. So this is about different joints, especially focusing on the synovial joints.